So I've been around a little while working in this stuff. These days I pretty much focus on the three topics in SQL Server and Azure and Hadoop. But I'm interested in pretty much all aspects of computing, mostly around data. And so, you'll probably find me out on Twitter or blogging or out on LinkedIn. So. Let's see. So my contact for Twitter is @BigSQL. I'm the guy who's been thinking about SQL Server scalability for a long time now. When Hadoop was introduced, I wanted to marry those two worlds and ended up doing it kind of early. This talk is going to be mainly for just about anybody that's interested, particularly DBAs and how they might look at this feature, managers, designers, or people who are just curious about how it works and what they might gain from doing it. So I'm not going to bore you with tons of slides. I don't think you get a lot out of that. I think so. It's really focused more on demo. So I hope that helps. Some people like that, some people don't. So hopefully you're one of the ones that does. With SQL Server 2016, we're all just searching for answers. It's all brand new. We've only had it out less than a month now. Of course, it's been in preview and whatnot. We've kind of known which direction it was going to go and what we're going to get to look at. But so far, it's doing pretty well as far as stability, feature set, all those things are doing great, at least from what we're seeing so far. So the real question becomes, to a lot of you maybe, what is this idea of stretched database and where does it come from and how does it work? So we're going to kind of talk about that. So when your database is new and it's little and cute, it's a lot more fun to deal with. And as time goes on and we get more data, it turns into this. Everything starts to be affected, right? So we just have this sort of propagation due to the growth. The bigger it gets, the longer everything takes. Maintenance takes longer, backups take longer, everything takes more. Your costs are going to rise due to storage and footprint. And then there come questions of like business continuity planning and how are we going to deal with this from a disaster recovery perspective when we have to do distributed computing. So all these things become factors of this problem, and it's a problem we've been dealing with for as long as I've been in this business. So this is kind of just a new answer to that problem. And with new, it has some exciting potential, and so there's some things to definitely talk about on that. So the theory of data aging, or what I think of as the theory of aging data, is that the older it is, the less it's needed, right? So when we just put that brand new record in to whatever OLTP system we have, it gets used a lot, it gets updated a lot, gets looked at a lot, and the older it becomes, the longer people stop looking at that particular record for other than maybe some summary analysis and that kind of problem. So, it kind of makes sense over the long haul. Why would I want to see banking records from 10 years ago unless I was trying to do some kind of projection based on that kind of information? But even then, 10 years is a long time, and it could be that that isn't even statistically interesting. So if that's the kind of analysis you're doing, but it just depends, right? So and of course, as these big systems, the bigger these systems get, the more data has to be stored, and so what we've come up with are just all kinds of ways to get around these problems, right? So years ago, we came up with the ideas, obviously, of scaling up. We can get a bigger system, right? We can always make it bigger, get bigger and bigger boxes and faster storage, and we can kind of scale in that direction, and that's a great answer to a point. But there does come to a place where this is no longer a real viable answer, right? So you basically run out of the ability of the hardware to be able to manage the problem, at least not in that sense of just getting a bigger box. And that's kind of what this addresses. And so, we started talking in the late 80s, early 90s about federation and how that worked. That's a picture of Wernher von Braun about Saturn V rocket. He was the guy that came up with the idea, well, we'll just take one of these big engines and we'll put 5 of them together and that'll give us the boost we need. So federation's kind of like that in that way, and that we're taking a bunch of servers in a class and spreading the love. So it kind of looks like this, right? And some of you have probably seen a lot of discussion around this, so it may be new for some of you. But that's kind of the idea behind it. I'm kind of demonstrating in this like what distributed partition views might look like, where we have a view that covers 3 different servers, but they're all using the same constituent tables, but the tables contain different data, obviously. So SQL Server does a really cool trick around this, which is partition elimination, right? So if it knows that data can only come from table D, it only considers table D. So it eliminates the other 2 servers and only goes after the data. If it's all done right and carefully prepared, it can figure that out. And then we finally came up with the idea of table partitioning as an industry. And then we did some range calculations for range functions and partition schemes and all this. And so all these ideas deal with this idea of a big loaded database and how to deal with it. And so far, it's been in the context of carving it up into smaller pieces, which makes it easier to back up and easier to get decent performance out of without a lot of tricks. So those have been kind of the past. Now comes the idea of the stretch database. And so we're basically hosting your data resource on-prem locally as well as in the cloud. It could be a fairly nice, easy way to ease into cloud utilization of database resources. And so Microsoft came up with this cool idea of being able to just we say stretch databases, and it is somewhat set up at the database level. We'll get into that, but really most of the time we're thinking in terms at the table level, or at least I am. And like most of you, I'm learning this as I go too. So forgive me, this is a brand new presentation and a brand new piece of technology. So we'll try to work through this together. In any case, so as you can see from this diagram that came straight from MSDN, you can see how this is designed to work, where we have Azure up in the upper quadrant and the on-premise solution on the lower, and how that they envision this to work. And so, one of the things that you're going to find out really early is that there were just a ton of limitations around this technology. So it's not like for every table that you can find, and it's not for every database that is involved out there. And it can be expensive if you don't manage it closely. So you have to really look closely about what is it that you need to do. And so to that end, here are some of the limitations. Like, you can't make changes to the data on migrated rows. So you can't do any updates or deletes or anything like that. It doesn't have any
Roland, sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
Is there any way to cut down on the background noise, or or can you speak up a little bit to kind of counteract it?
Sure, I can try.
Okay.
I'm kind of in a public place, so it's kind of hard to do.
I know. I just figured I would ask.
Sorry, everybody.
No problem.
Okay, so it doesn't. have any knowledge of constraints on the migrated data. So if you're relying on foreign key constraints or unique constraints or anything like that, those aren't going to work. Filters are not propagated either. Here's some other interesting ones, like tables with more than 1,023 columns or 998 indexes aren't migratable. There's all these things, and rather than go one by one through these and bore you all with that, there's some pretty obvious things in this list, and some not so obvious things. Like if your table has data types that are stored off row, they're not going to work. If the table is replicated or using change tracking or change data capture, that won't work either. Obviously, memory optimized won't work for pretty obvious reasons, and so forth. Let's see. XML indexes, spatial indexes, all that. So here's the bright spot in all this. All of this is changing as we use it, right? So one thing I can tell you is that what it doesn't do this moment, it might do tomorrow. You can't ever say with absolute certainty that Azure won't do this or that. What happens is it does it sooner or later. And depending on, I don't know if it's market pressure or just availability of resources, but it does change all the time. So it's important to go back, and even if it doesn't work today, it may work for you in the future. So for me, the toughest part is figuring out what tables will actually work. So from my own little limited experience with this so far, I'm finding out that because of all the other constraints and whatnot, that the tables that seem to work are going to be the key value pair kinds of things that you might have done in that sort of strategy, because you don't have many data types to deal with. You're dealing with integers and maybe a varchar or something like that, and everything's on row therefore. You're not looking at a lot of different kinds of constraints. So to figure this out, there's two easy ways to figure out what tables will migrate. One is to run the upgrade advisor that we're all very familiar with at this point. We've had it now for, I don't know, at least probably 10 years. And then the latest edition will help you do this. And SSMS itself and the Stretch Database Wizard will do the same thing, basically. So let's kind of go through that, what that looks like. Back here at the back of this thing, I've got some links we can go to. Let's take a look at the Database Advisor. Grab this link. And these links, we'll make sure that I'll give you, Liz, the copies of this so you can share if you want to. Okay, so here's an article identifying this very thing, as well as the link to the new Upgrade Advisor. We'll just go ahead and run that. Download this guy. Just in case you've never seen this. We've had this Upgrade Advisor, like I said, for many years. Can help you sort out what can and can't move. Okay, so now let's just run this. And so if you look up here in the top, I'm going to see if this will work for me. I've got a funky kind of keyboard on this laptop. Anyway, you can see this Run Stretch Database Advisor wizard over here, and we're going to run that really quick on instance I've got running out here. So. Connect. We'll pick this one database to work with. And now I'm going to tell it run.
The product manager for MyRack is on.
And you can see it over on the left-hand panel running. It's going to give me a quick report on all the tables that could be migrated. If we click on it, we can start to see, well, here's the person.person table we're all familiar with in AdventureWorks. Well, it has some problems. We can see we have check constraints and the severity of how that's going to go, what objects are impacted. We'll click on this whole thing here so you can see it. And then what the rule is involved. Foreign keys, got a data type it doesn't like, default value constraints. So all of these are rules that are going to prevent that table from moving. So this is one way to get some knowledge of which ones will and which ones won't, and what you might have to do to mitigate the problems, right? Sales order header be one. And, any of the sales order history and stuff, well, that would be the candidate, I would think, for this. Like this transaction history might be. It looks like there's, what, 3 objects here. Let's see what 3 objects they are. Okay, so basically that's around the default value. So it looks like something you could overcome to mitigate that problem. So this is one way to do it. Another way to do it is to run it in SQL Server Management Studio. So to that end, I've built this little script out here for you guys. So like all good things in SQL Server is an option. We always find ourselves changing these with reconfigure. Right, so now I turned it on. So I'm going to use the AdventureWorks 2014 database and then create our own table. I'm also using the new drop table. That if you haven't seen that, that's really cool. Cut out a lot of the noise from past ways we used to go with that. So we're going to do that, and we're going to insert from the person-person table. Right. So we've got about what, about 19,972 rows. Right. So now we have a table here. Now tasks through here to missed it. Sorry. Task stretch. Enable. So once you go here, it's going to guide you through the ways to go set this up. Now, before you do this, know that you know, there are cost implications for turning this on, and so you want to be careful and not leave it on if you don't intend to. And it's going to give me an estimate here what it's going to charge to do this. So, on a long-term basis, so it will tell you. If we go through, you're going to find out, I think, in all that database, the only table that qualifies is probably mine. As you can see, they put this little red slash circle thing going there. We can see that the stretch table we just created is I think the only thing out here. There might be one other. Something might pass muster. Next. So I have to sign in.
So there's an opportunity to say, hey,
Workers.
So this is not actually change your database platform, which
I just figured that. Shame on me.
right? So that's interesting. SQL Server 2005 end of life, so they need to go somewhere.
Okay, so found the subscription we have. It's going to go create this. I'm going to let it create a new server.
During that time, you're going to have
And one of the things that you need is a big ugly password if you've dealt with Azure. You know that it's going to be 12 characters. It's going to have something from all the different groups. I don't use that one all the time, so you're free to copy it. I made that up here a little while ago. So I'm going to actually going to hang on to that just so I remember what I said. And the other thing to notice is it starts out in Australia East for some reason. So we're actually in the U.S. So we'll go here. It wants another password. Well, I like the one I picked. I'm not suggesting this is a good idea for your own purposes.
And we have SQL Server 2016.
I think I fixed it.
Full launch. I thought at that time it would be a good idea to take what you did for the sales enablement and turn that into a.
I wouldn't have any idea why it's doing that.
Stuff we can get people selling racks.
Must have this in it.
That is also a good opportunity, right? So that takes us to Q4. We're going to need a pipeline power play.
Oh, database master key is probably out there. That's why.
We've had good success in the past with making SQL experts available to people for consultation. People like that play. Again,
I am not seeing anything.
SQL Pass Summit. So the what is it like there? It's a server professional organization or whatever.
Let's refresh this to make sure.
It's happening in Seattle. So it would be interesting to go to. It wasn't planned for.
Stick one look in here just for giggles.
Technical presentations for the folks. We could get some more on our hybrid play, so supporting stretch database. We'll have the full launch in 2016. And
Well, let's try it again.
Hey, database quick. Once I got past 2016, I think we have a SQL database service opportunity. I think we have a SQL relational plus algebra play. Flushed out yet, but and by
Well, I don't know where it's getting it from. We'll see. Database master key. So anyway, it'll go through and attempt to do that. I think that the problem is I set this up earlier on the same machine. I may come back to this here a bit and see if we can properly recreate those. Yep. Hang on 1 second. Let's see. Delete. We'll give it one more try here. It's probably hanging on to something.
maybe by then, or maybe we'll start there. Our customers will should have enough customers happening, virtually from different times of the day that we can stop even charging for the connect between.
Let's see.
think we have a couple already. So, I mean, for the most part, we either share database, we share maybe transit hubs. So, you know, everything comes to database at some point.
All right. If that was the case, it's no longer. So now, let's see. We can go here. We'll create our table again. We'll go here.
That's exactly why we're not done with these services.
Give it a log out. We'll give that
This
wonderful
was a
password.
server plan. This is the managed databases side of the portfolio.
Change this. And I think we're ready to go.
We need a services plan that goes along with this. Like, we have to have both.
Looks like it.
Where I
Forgot about that.
Microsoft's help was on the server side, because that's what they're money, right?
So it says, by the way, to remember to store that password you created and protect the DMK as you might need it in the future. I don't think they mean write that on a yellow sticky note, but you never know.
It's just that wasn't important.
So in this case, because I'm behind someone else's network at a client site, I'm going to just go ahead and take the public IP. This is probably not best practice, but
Directionally, he is indeed an opportunity.
so here's the interesting page that you should be looking at. If you look down here at estimated pricing, it's estimating that $61 US per terabyte per month, which doesn't sound too bad for an enterprise. But the other storage, I guess the how much per month at the utilization rate would be $912.50. So be mindful of that, and also look at the pricing page it's pointing you to. Finish, and it'll go through, and it will carve up this table into on-prem versus off. Interestingly, you can insert all the rows you want. You just can't change any of them. We'll go through that in a minute.
It's updated? Yeah. Let me think sometime.
It says customer data must be a Cisco 4948 EOS and 750 Nexus 3064.
And away it goes. It's pretty slick.
They're the new ones replacing the 3064s. Seems like there's a shortfall in the key of the speech.
We're waiting on this. I kind of see that a lot of history tables could be partitioned in this kind of way, where you could get the history out there. It's one way, right? And that's a lot of times the way history works. Is, they're not being updated; they're just being inserted. Lots of audit logs are like that. Lots of history logs are like that. So I think that this is a very narrow use of this tool so far, because the features are kind of constrained a little bit. But it's very useful. I think that overall it's pretty cool. You can see that so far the amount of effort to figure out what can be partitioned and what can be sent over and what can't is pretty clear.
I like that.
And I've got a bunch of references in the back of this document you can hand out that will get you to the same places, but basically all the rules are pretty clear and pretty understandable. Hopefully this will finish up pretty quick for you, so we can do kind of a little bit of driving around in it. Do seem to recall earlier today it took a little bit of time too. So should be almost there.
Yep.
There she goes. Okay. Hey, look at that. So now we have a database that's hooked up in this way. Easy to do. So now, so there's all kinds of things we can do. Like I could try to do this update, right? Which we know should fail, right? Because you can't do any kind of updates to any of the data that's out there. You can, however, continue to insert records, right? So let me get this highlighted properly. So actually, before I start, let's do it. Select account.
I have a similar discussion with the data source team. They sell some stuff, put stuff on there, and it's dedicated, and they don't want to present it as
So now
and
it's going to have to look both places, right? Because it's sharded some of this up to the cloud and some of it's local. I'm sure there's some DMV functions either built or will be built around this that would help me decide which one's where. We know that right now that value is about 20,000 rows. So now if we do this again, we do the same insert. I would expect nearly double that, right? And there we go. So now that we've done that part of it, what we need to do is disable it and drop it for the cost reading. So from our part, I could try to delete the table, right? I have a drop table statement here. But I bet it didn't drop it really. Well, actually it did, but I don't think it disabled. It didn't do all the other part. Now that it's gone, of course you can't do that. Something important to note of the two different things going on here. One will abandon the table but bring the data back, which you will pay for in bandwidth. And the other one will just abandon the data that's out there and leave it behind and drop it. Sometimes it'll be important to do one over the other, so just know there's two ways. And since the table's gone, we can go ahead and turn this off here. Chug for a minute.
The other click and let's see. We started from 4, backdoor. I think we go
right. Define it.
So I don't know how long it's going to take. Just decided to have a slight change.
Well, that's thinking about it. We're going to go out to our portal. We're going to find anything with a main stretch in it. So you can see here we have the database and the server still out there. We're going to want to drop these so that they don't continue to cause us pain.
Yeah, something like that.
So we'll go ahead and delete this guy.
Yeah, you should try to maybe
As you can see. Now the bare minimum, of course, is it's charged by the hour. So I haven't used an hour of it, but I'll pay for an hour of it. So now the database and server are gone too. So it's important to do that. Go back to the portal, make sure you drop it if that's what you need to do. Otherwise, it's pretty straightforward and pretty well documented. So at this point, we're kind of a little bit early, but it's probably acceptable for this small feature. Liz, do we have any questions? Let's see.
Yeah, you should have access to the questions panel, Roland, but if not, I can read them off to you.
Yep, okay. All I see is never mind, I was wrong. Can't read anything else. That's all I have on this. Does anybody have questions about it?
Yeah, I'll pull them up for you. Okay. Let's see. Can you only stretch to Azure, or can you stretch to another server locally?
Only to Azure.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just reading through these. Someone wants to know if you were presenting in a cube farm.
I am. I am. Sorry about that too. There's just no way around it today. I can't see the question very well. I don't know what I'm doing wrong here.
All right, here we go. Is the stretch database on Azure readable? I've heard in preview it was, but at GA it became a distinct PAS database type.
Is it readable? Yes. I just did read it. What if they mean writable? So I did a bunch of inserts as well. You can't update it at all, meaning you couldn't go back later and then do an update against it.
Someone wants to know what the benefit of trickling into the cloud is. What the benefit of trickling into the cloud is. Is it to benefit an app as an alternative live data source?
Well, think about what's going on here is that typically when we do these kinds of strategies, there's a lot of planning that goes into this, sometimes weeks or even months. And so we would have to invent all the ETL to move the data around between the different servers. If, say, this is a federation scheme. In this case, they're pretty much in charge of this scheme. So the benefit of the trickling, I would say, is one, it's not tied to any specific bandwidth. So you might have a really small network pipe going in and out of your facility. It might have to be really big. So I think they're probably using some of the same maybe strategy around they might use around like Store Simple, which doesn't really depend on a specific size as a rule. So that would be what I think is the benefit.
Okay. This question is actually coming from Sean Wyrick, who's one of our consultants. He wants to know, is this similar to other Azure resources where he can scale the stretch up and down using PowerShell or the portal?
I haven't tried that, Sean, but I did mean to get out there and do that. I think you can, because when I went out in the portal earlier, I could see the database units that it was using, and it looked like you could just push the button and scale it up and down. So that would help control costs, by the way, so just so everybody knows.
Okay. Someone said they missed the beginning of the presentation, and I don't remember if you covered this or not, but how do you make sure about the constraints while doing the stretch?
Constraints are not allowed on tables that have constraints are not allowed. So if you run one of the two ways I showed you to figure out if a table will be even allowed to do that, then that will pretty much decide whether or not it can be done at all.
Is the limit on updating data only applicable to the stretched rows or all of the rows in the table?
It's a great question. I have tried to just update all of them. haven't tried them individually, but I think it's all of them. I don't think it's. I don't think it'll let you decide that. You know, it seems to allow insert, but nothing else. I don't think you're allowed to do anything after that. So the one operation you're allowed is insert. Anyway.
Okay. Can we re-index tables that are in the cloud?
Indexes are another whole topic on this. There are tons of limitations around it. The best thing to do on that is to go to some of the resources I've provided, because you wouldn't believe how complicated that can get.
Okay. Is it advisable to only consider tables that need to be archived to be considered for moving into stretched databases? What is Microsoft stretching if Azure is still not ready?
Well, it's ready for some applications. I mean, clearly, this is really aimed at, I think, as a key value store. And so, you know, that's a really popular fundamental principle of computing. So if you've got the need for a key value store, like many people, like even audit logs, where it's, you know, pretty simple data types that are not stored off row and don't have any real constraints, you're just shoving data in a one-way key store, that's the perfect application for this. And those are typically high volume and high sizes, so you'll see that those are great. I think what will come in this in time with this is that you will be able to do updates, and I think you'll be able to you'll find more use and more use cases because it'll be more flexible.
Okay. Can two replicas in an always-on AG both be stretched to the same stretch DB, or must each have a separate stretch DB target?
Wow, that's a great question, and I have no idea. Always-on is definitely an interesting cat all by itself, and how well it plays with this feature, that's an interesting question. I know one of the things that I thought of kind of in that same light was, you know, how does this work with any kind of strategy that we might use for disaster recovery, for example. Like, for example, I don't believe, I think I read somewhere you can't log shipping might be out. So there are lots of questions around this as far as disaster recovery. As far as always on, you know, because always on is done at such a low level, it may not affect it at all. That's just something you'd have to research.
And also, Roland, Matt Gordon next Tuesday is doing a presentation about always on in SQL 2016. So he might know something about that too. So if you want to sign up for that session and ask the question during that might be good.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think Matt might know, because I know he does a lot with always on. I do too, but not literally his level. So.
All right. Someone wants to know if you would use this in place of a remote server backup.
Well, you know, the fact this is being backed up in Azure, so I would say, yeah, that probably would work as a replacement for that, but just for this one piece, right? So we're at the table level. If you're thinking database level, no.
Can the filter predicate be dynamic to use the current date so that as data ages, it will be stretched?
No, I don't know of how public they've been about how the key is in the filtering is that they're using. So I think that a lot of that would depend on that. I don't know on the filter predicate if you can even, it probably is documented somewhere at some point. If it isn't already, it will be, but I'm not aware of it, so I don't really know.
Okay. This is the last question, unless some more come in. How different is performance tuning on Azure versus a standalone server since it's hosted by someone or somewhere?
Well, it's different, you know, but it's still, you're dealing with basically the same things you know and love when it comes to the SQL Server Optimizer and how that works, query plans and how they work. So they're pieces of it, especially in these hybrid situations where you might end up having more of an issue trying to troubleshoot. performance issues, but the same things apply that you already know, whether you're working in Azure or whether you're working on premises. And that's kind of the beauty of SQL Server 2016. So they have given us our same tool set that we all know how to use and made it available to us in Azure. So predominantly the answer is we already have those tools. We already know how to use them. So.
Okay. Well, that was the last question. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. If you happen to think of any more questions, you can please feel free to email me, Liz. It's the email that comes with all your GoToWebinar information, and I'll be more than happy to pass that along to Roland. Again, thanks, everybody, for joining us. Thanks, Roland, for presenting, and we'll see you guys on Thursday, hopefully.
All right.
All right. Thanks, Roland.
You bet. Take care.